My sister forbade me from attending my parents' 40th wedding anniversary party. Hours later, she posted a photo with the caption, "Family only." I liked it and commented congratulations. Now the mortgage and taxes are yours. 7 minutes later, the post disappeared and 145 missed calls appeared. My name is Sophia, and at 32 years old, I am a senior wealth manager in Atlanta, handling portfolios worth millions. I know the value of a dollar, and I certainly know the cost of betrayal. If you have ever been the financial backbone for people who do not respect you, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to remind your family exactly who signs the checks. It was 11:30 at night and I was still in my corner office overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The city lights were a blur of gold and amber below me, but inside the glass walls of the firm it was dead silent. I was reviewing a merger agreement for a tech client when my phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. It was an Instagram notification. I usually ignore social media while working, but the preview name caught my eye. Tasha, my younger sister, the golden child who had not worked a real job since she tried to become a lifestyle influencer 5 years ago. I slid my finger across the screen and the photo loaded. My stomach did not drop. It hardened. There they were. My parents, Marcus and Beatrice, standing in the center of the grand foyer under the crystal chandelier I had paid for last Christmas. Tasha was to their left wearing a vintage Chanel gown that I had purchased for her birthday. And to their right was Kyle, my brother-in-law, holding a glass of Dom Perignon vintage champagne that came from my wine cellar. They looked perfect. They looked happy. And they were standing in my house. The caption read, 40th anniversary, small gathering, family only. The hashtag was blessed. I sat there in my ergonomic office chair and stared at the pixels. 2 weeks ago, I had wired $50,000 to my mother's account to cover the catering and decor for this exact event. When I asked about the date last Tuesday, my mother told me they had postponed it because Dad was feeling under the weather. She lied. They did not postpone it. They just did not want the ATM machine to ruin the aesthetic. I was good enough to pay for the roof over their heads and the clothes on their backs, but I was not good enough to be in the picture. I zoomed in on Tasha's smile. It was the smile of someone who had never paid a property tax bill in her life. I felt a cold calm wash over me. It is a specific kind of numbness you get when you deal with volatile markets all day. You do not panic. You execute. I did not call them. I did not cry. I simply opened a new tab on my browser and logged into my personal banking dashboard. The screen populated with numbers. I navigated to the standing orders section. There it was. The monthly automatic transfer of $45,000 titled Family Support. This covered the mortgage on the Buckhead estate, the property taxes, the landscaping fees, the pool maintenance, and the black card limits for Tasha and my mother. My finger hovered over the mouse. For 5 years, I had convinced myself that this was my duty, that because I made it out and became successful, I owed it to them to keep them comfortable. But looking at that photo labeled family only, I realized something. If they are the family and I am not, then they should pay the family bills. I clicked Cancel Recurring Transfer. A confirmation box popped up asking if I was sure. I clicked Yes. Then I went to the credit card tab. I selected the supplementary cards issued to Tasha and Beatrice. Status active. I clicked Suspend immediately. Reason for suspension. I typed in fraud, because that is what they were. Frauds. I watched the screen refresh. Transfer canceled. Card suspended. Estimated savings for me next month $45,000. But I was not done. The financial cut was the injury, but I needed to deliver the message. I picked up my phone again and went back to Instagram. The likes were rolling in. People were commenting on how beautiful the family looked, how successful Kyle looked in his rented tuxedo. I typed slowly and deliberately. Congratulations to the happy couple. Since this is a private event for family only, I assume family will be handling the $45,000 mortgage and tax payment due on the 1st. I just canceled the transfer. Cheers. I hit post. I put the phone down face up on the desk and poured myself the last of the sparkling water from my carafe. It tasted better than champagne. I watched the clock on the wall. 1 minute passed, then 2. At the 3-minute mark, my phone lit up. It was a text from Tasha. It just said, "What the hell, Sophia?" I did not open it. At 4 minutes, the first call came in. It was my mother. I let it ring. At 5 minutes, Kyle called, then Dad, then Tasha again. The screen of my phone was flashing like a strobe light. The vibrations were rattling the expensive wood of my desk. I could imagine the scene at the party, the music stopping, the frantic whispering, the panic setting in as they realized the free ride had just come to a screeching halt. At the 7-minute mark, I refreshed the Instagram page. Content unavailable. The post was gone. Deleted. But the damage was done. My comment had been up long enough for the screenshots to be taken. Long enough for the cousins and the church members to see it. The calls kept coming. 145 missed calls in total. I reached over and held the power button on the side of my phone until the screen went black. The office was silent again. I packed my laptop into my bag. For the first time in years, I was going to go home and sleep like a baby. The war had started, and I had just fired the first shot. The morning sun hitting the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse usually brought me a sense of peace. It was the only time of day when the city of Atlanta felt still, a moment of golden silence before the chaos of the markets began. But today, the silence was heavy. My phone sat on the marble kitchen island like a loaded weapon. It had finally stopped buzzing around 3 in the morning, but as soon as the clock struck 7, it started again. The caller ID displayed Mom. I stared at it while the coffee machine whirred. I had slept for maybe 4 hours, my dreams filled with flashes of that Instagram photo and the smug look on Tasha's face. I took a sip of black coffee, burned my tongue, and swiped to answer. I did not say hello. I just held the phone to my ear and waited. I expected shouting. I expected tears. But Beatrice Johnson was a master of a different kind of warfare. Her voice was icy, trembling, with a contained rage that she usually reserved for customer service workers who denied her expired coupons. "Sophia, you have exactly 10 minutes to fix this," she said. I almost laughed. No good morning, no asking why I was upset, just a demand. I leaned against the counter and asked her what exactly she wanted me to fix. "You know exactly what," she snapped. "You humiliated us." "Do you have any idea who was at that party?" Kyle invited potential investors for his tech venture. Men from Silicon Valley, Sophia, men who value family stability. And then they see your little outburst on social media about mortgages and taxes. You made us look like charity cases. You made Kyle look like a fraud. I calmly reminded her that Kyle is a fraud, or at the very least a man who spends more time networking than actually working. But she cut me off. "This is not about Kyle. This is about you being spiteful. You have always been like this. Cold. Calculation. You cannot stand to see your sister happy because you are sitting alone in that empty apartment with nothing but your bank accounts to keep you warm." That stung. It was the classic Beatrice pivot. When logic fails, attack my personal life, attack my womanhood. For 5 years, this had been the narrative. Sophia is the wallet, but Tasha is the prize. Tasha was the one who got the white husband, the social status, the adoration. I was just the mechanic who kept the engine running so they could drive the car. I took a deep breath and decided it was time to lay the cards on the table. I asked her if she remembered where she was living 5 years ago. There was silence on the line. I pressed harder. I asked her if she remembered the eviction notice taped to the door of their old house in Cascade because Dad had gambled away his pension and the business capital. "I did not do this for credit, Mom," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I bought the Buckhead estate under my LLC so you would not be homeless. I paid off Dad's gambling debts so he would not go to jail. I have funded every vacation, every designer bag, and every catered dinner for half a decade. And you repay me by banning me from the anniversary party that I paid for." Her response was immediate and breathtaking in its audacity. "That is what family does, Sophia. We support each other. You have so much, and we fell on hard times. It is your duty. But just because you pay the bills does not mean you own us. It does not give you the right to disrespect your father and me. And frankly, your attitude is why you are still single at 32. You are too hard, too aggressive. You act like a man, Sophia. Tasha knows how to be a wife. She knows how to support her husband emotionally. You just throw money at problems and expect people to bow down to you." I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. There it was. The core of the resentment. They hated needing me. My success was a constant reminder of their failure, particularly my father's failure to provide, and my mother's failure to raise a son who could take over. Instead, they got me. The daughter who worked 80-hour weeks, who navigated spaces dominated by white men who built a fortune from nothing. And instead of being proud, they were ashamed that they had to rely on a woman to save them. Beatrice continued, her voice softening into that manipulative tone she used when she wanted something. "Look, we can put this behind us. Kyle is very upset, but he is willing to forgive you if you issue a public apology. Write a post saying you were hacked or that it was a misunderstanding. Reinstate the transfers, Sophia. The property tax is due on Tuesday, and you know your father's blood pressure cannot handle stress right now. Do the right thing. Be the bigger person. The bigger person." The phrase I had heard my entire life. Be the bigger person when Tasha steals your clothes. Be the bigger person when we miss your graduation to go to Tasha's pageant. Be the bigger person and pay the bill. I looked out at the city. The sun was fully up now, illuminating the skyscrapers where thousands of people were going to work to earn their living. I thought about the $50,000 I had wired 2 weeks ago. I thought about the way they cropped me out of their lives while living in the luxury I provided. I lowered my voice, making sure she could hear every syllable clearly. "Mom, I am done being the bigger person. I am going to be the smart person. You want to talk about appearances. You want to save face in front of Kyle's investors. Fine. You can keep the appearance. You can pretend you are rich. You can pretend Kyle is a genius. But from this moment on, you are financing that fantasy yourselves." "Sophia, do not start this," she warned, her voice rising in panic. "I am not starting anything," I interrupted. "I am finishing it. You said I act like a man. Well, today I am making a business decision. The asset is underperforming and the liabilities are too high. I am cutting my losses. You have 30 days to figure out the mortgage, the taxes, and your country club fees." "You cannot do this," she screamed. "That house is our home. We have lived there for 5 years. "Correction," I said. "That house is my investment property. You are tenants who have not paid rent in 60 months, and you just violated the lease agreement by disrespecting the landlord, Sophia." "Figure it out, Mom. Maybe ask Tasha to chip in. I hear being a wife pays very well in emotional currency. See if the bank accepts that." I pulled the phone away from my ear as she began to shriek my name. I pressed the red icon to end the call. Then I blocked the number. The apartment was silent again, but this time it did not feel heavy. It felt lighter. I took another sip of my coffee. It was still hot, but it no longer burned. It tasted like freedom. I knew this was far from over. I knew they would not go quietly. They were desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. But for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of losing them. I was only afraid of what I would have to do to make them leave. 2 hours later, my intercom buzzed. It was Marcus from the front desk lobby downstairs. His voice was professional, but I could hear the slight tension in it. "Ms. Johnson, I have a group of 4 people here demanding to see you. They claim to be your family. They are causing quite a scene in the atrium. I told them you are in a meeting, but the gentleman is threatening to call the police and report a theft. Shall I have security escort them out? I spun my chair around to face the city view. A theft? That was rich. They were accusing me of theft because I stopped letting them rob me blind. I considered letting Marcus throw them out. It would be easy, it would be clean, but it would not be enough. If I sent them away now, they would just play the victim card to the rest of the family. They would spin a story about how cruel I was. No. I needed them to come up here. I needed to look them in the eye on my turf, where I held all the cards. Send them up, Marcus, I said, and tell security to stand by outside my conference room doors. I hung up and walked into the adjoining conference room. It was a space designed to intimidate. A 20-foot table made of black marble floor-to-ceiling glass walls and freezing cold air conditioning that I kept at 65 degrees to keep meetings short. I sat at the head of the table and placed a thick manila folder in front of me. I waited. 5 minutes later, the double glass doors swung open. They did not walk in. They marched in. My father led the charge. His face flushed a deep purple. My mother was right behind him, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. Tasha was clinging to Kyle's arm like a frightened bird, but Kyle looked around the room with a sneer of appraisal. He was sizing up my office, probably calculating the square footage and wondering how much the art on the walls was worth. Sophia. My father boomed, his voice echoing off the hard surfaces. Who do you think you are, blocking your mother's number? We have been standing in that lobby for 20 minutes like common criminals. I did not stand up. I did not smile. I just gestured to the 4 empty chairs at the other end of the table. Sit down, I said. My voice was low, but it cut through his shouting instantly. They hesitated. They were used to the Sophia who cooked Thanksgiving dinner and ran errands. They were not used to Sophia, the senior wealth manager, who negotiated multi-million-dollar buyouts before breakfast. Slowly they sat. Kyle leaned back in his chair and crossed his legs, attempting to look relaxed. He adjusted his suit jacket, which I noticed was a cheap polyester blend he tried to pass off as Italian silk. He cleared his throat and decided to take charge of the meeting. Look, Sophia, let's all just take a breath here. Kyle began, using a tone one might use with a hysterical child. We drove all the way down here because we are worried about you. Really worried. This erratic behavior, the cutting off of funds, the social media outbursts, it is not like you. I stared at him. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch out until Tasha started fidgeting. Kyle continued, emboldened by my silence. You know, in the startup world, we see this a lot with female founders. The pressure gets to be too much. You are dealing with high-stakes finance all day, and sometimes, well, women in your position struggle to separate their personal emotions from business logic. You are acting on impulse, Sophia. You are being emotional because you felt left out of a party. But you cannot let your feelings dictate liquidity. That is just bad business. My mother nodded aggressively. Exactly. It is hysterical behavior, Sophia. Just like when you were a teenager. I felt a vein in my temple pulse, but I kept my face completely blank. This man, whose only business experience was failing to launch 3 different apps and living off his wife's sister, was lecturing me on business logic. He was mansplaining my own money to me. Is that right, Kyle? I asked softly. You think this is an emotional decision? It is textbook, Kyle said, smiling that condensing smile. You are lashing out. But we are willing to overlook it. We are family. If you reinstate the transfers and sign that bridge loan guarantee for my company, we can pretend this little tantrum never happened. We know you need to feel important. I looked at Tasha. She was avoiding my gaze, looking down at her manicured nails. Nails that I paid for. I picked up the manila folder in front of me. I tapped it against the marble table. The sound was sharp like a gunshot. You talk a lot about business, Kyle, I said. So let's talk business. Let's talk about overhead costs and return on investment. I opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. They were stapled together, color-coded, and highlighted. I slid the first stack down the long marble table. It stopped perfectly in front of Tasha. "What is this?" Tasha whispered. "That is your credit card statement from last month, Tasha. The one I pay." Kyle waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, come on, Sophia. Tasha buys a few groceries. Don't be petty." I stood up then. I walked slowly around the table, my heels clicking on the floor. "A few groceries," I asked. "Let's look at line item 14. $3,000 at Gucci. Line item 20. $500 at the Buckhead Spa. Line item 32. $200 at a sushi restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon." I stopped right behind Kyle's chair. I could smell his cologne. It was strong and musky, trying too hard to mask the scent of desperation. "You call me emotional, Kyle. You say I cannot separate feelings from finance. But looking at these statements, I see a very different story. I see a man who calls himself a CEO, but cannot even afford to buy his wife lunch." Kyle spun around in his chair to face me, his face turning red. "I am investing every cent I have into my company. That is how entrepreneurship works. We make sacrifices." I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "You make sacrifices?" I asked. "No, Kyle. I make sacrifices. You make reservations." I reached over his shoulder and grabbed the second stack of papers from the folder. I slammed it down in front of him. "You want to talk about petty? You want to talk about me being an emotional woman? Take a look at the highlighted charge on page 3. Kyle looked down. Tasha looked over his shoulder. My parents craned their necks to see. It was a charge from CVS Pharmacy, $27.50. I leaned down close to his ear and whispered loud enough for the whole room to hear. "That charge is for tampons, Kyle. Feminine hygiene products, painkillers." I straightened up and walked back to the head of the table. "You are sitting here in my office wearing a suit I probably paid for indirectly, lecturing me on business and calling me emotional. But tell me, Mr. CEO, what kind of powerful businessman lets his sister-in-law pay for his wife's period products?" The room went dead silent. Tasha gasped and covered her mouth. My father looked away, unable to meet my eyes. My mother looked like she had swallowed a lemon. But Kyle looked like I had just slapped him across the face. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The arrogance was gone, replaced by pure, naked humiliation. I sat back down in my leather chair. "So," I said, crossing my arms, "now that we have established that you cannot even afford the basic necessities of life without my emotional money, let's discuss the terms of your surrender, because as of right now, the Bank of Sofia is closed. Permanently. And judging by those statements, you have about 3 days before you are starving. So who wants to speak next?" The fallout from my declaration of financial independence was immediate, and it was spectacular. I returned to my office and watched the digital notifications roll in like a ticker tape of their unraveling lives. I had not just cut off the money, I had cut off their oxygen. In the world my family inhabited, oxygen was not air, it was access. It was the ability to swipe a piece of plastic and have the world bow down to you. Without it, they were just people standing in expensive clothes they could no longer afford to dry clean. The first domino fell at 2 in the afternoon. Tasha was at the Platinum Salon in Buckhead. I knew this because her appointment was a standing order on my calendar, a $300 blowout, and treatment she got every single week. I could picture her sitting in that swivel chair, sipping cucumber water and gossiping with her stylist, probably complaining about how mean her big sister was. When she walked up to the marble reception desk to pay her hair bouncing perfectly on her shoulders, she would have handed over the black card with that practiced nonchalance. I wasn't there, but I can imagine the scene perfectly. The receptionist, a girl named Sarah, who Tasha likely never made eye contact with, swiping the card. The machine beeping, the frown, the second swipe, the silence falling over the waiting area. I can hear Tasha's laugh, nervous and high-pitched. "Try it again," she would say. "The chip is probably dirty." But the chip was not dirty. The chip was dead. My phone lit up with a fraud alert notification. Attempted charge $350. Status declined. I swiped it away and took a sip of water. Tasha would have dug through her purse for the backup card. Declined. Then, the emergency card. Declined. For the first time in 5 years, Tasha had to feel the weight of her own wallet, and she found it empty. She had to leave the salon not with a receipt, but with the burning shame of having to call her husband who wasn't answering, and finally having to leave her driver's license as collateral, while she promised to come back with cash she didn't have. An hour later, the second domino toppled. My father, Marcus. He loved his vintage Cadillac almost as much as he loved hearing himself talk. He was at the premium pump at the Shell station on Northside Drive. I saw the alert pop up on my screen. Attempted charge $80. Status declined. Now my father is a proud man. A man who defines himself by the car he drives and the suit he wears. Standing there at the pump with the nozzle in his hand and the display flashing, see cashier must have felt like a physical blow. He would have marched inside demanding to speak to a manager, blaming the machine, blaming the bank, blaming everyone but himself. But no amount of bluster can override a frozen account. I imagine him having to walk back to the car, hang up the nozzle with 0 gallons pumped, and drive away on fumes, hoping he had enough gas to make it back to the mansion before the tank ran dry. By dinner time, they had all retreated to the house. My house. They were huddled together in the living room like survivors of a natural disaster, except the disaster was me. I still had access to the security cameras, of course. I hadn't cut those off yet. I wanted to see them. I watched the feed on my iPad as I ate a quiet dinner alone in my penthouse. The atmosphere in the living room was manic. Tasha was pacing back and forth, her hair still perfect, but her face twisted in rage. My mother was sitting on the sofa with a cold compress on her forehead. My father was pouring himself a drink from the bar, likely realizing that once the bottle was empty, there would be no replacement. And then there was Kyle. He was standing by the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing wildly. He was in full salesman mode. I turned up the volume on the feed to hear him better. "She is trying to break us," Kyle said, his voice smooth and confident. "Do you not see what she is doing? This is a power play. She wants us to crawl back to her. She wants us to beg. I am not begging that ungrateful girl for anything," my father spat out, slamming his glass down. "Exactly," Kyle said. "And we won't have to. Listen to me. I just got off the phone with the venture capital firm in San Francisco. They are loving the pitch deck. I am telling you, Marcus, we are days away from closing the Series A round. $5 million, maybe more." My mother looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. $5 million. "Are you sure, Kyle?" "I am 100% sure, Beatrice. They just need to run the final due diligence. Once that wire hits, we won't need Sophia's pennies. We will buy our own estate, bigger than this one, and we will leave her here to rot with her cats and her spreadsheets." I watched in disbelief as they ate it up. They were so desperate to believe him, so desperate to maintain their delusion of grandeur, that they ignored the reality crashing down around them. Kyle was selling them a life raft made of paper, and they were climbing aboard. "Don't worry about the credit cards," Kyle continued. "It's a temporary glitch. I'll move some funds around from my offshore accounts tomorrow to cover us until the funding clears. Sophia thinks she has checkmated us, but she's playing checkers while I'm playing chess." Chess. The man didn't even know how to play Go Fish. But it worked. My parents calmed down. Tasha stopped pacing. They rallied around their white savior, convinced that this was just a minor hiccup in their destined life of luxury. They truly believed that Sophia was just a bitter obstacle and that Kyle was the visionary who would lead them to the promised land. They didn't know that I had already run a background check on Kyle's investors. They didn't exist. The venture capital firm he mentioned had dissolved 2 years ago. There was no funding. There were no offshore accounts. There was only a mountain of debt and a ticking clock. I closed the iPad. Let them have their night of delusion. Let them sleep soundly on sheets they didn't own, because the real pain wasn't the declined credit cards. That was just the inconvenience. The real pain was coming in the morning mail. 3 days passed. The silence from their end was deafening. They didn't call. They didn't text. They were holding the line, waiting for Kyle's magical millions to materialize. I went to work, I managed portfolios, I made money. And I waited. On the fourth day, the letters arrived. I knew they were coming because I had forwarded the mail notifications to my email. But the physical envelopes were delivered to the mansion. Red envelopes, final notices, the electricity bill, the water bill, the gas bill. For years, these bills had been on auto-pay from my account. But when I cut the cord, I didn't just stop paying forward. I revoked the retroactive authorization. It turned out the utility companies had been trying to process the payments for the last cycle and failing. The grace period had technically expired 3 days ago. I checked the camera feed again that evening. The mood had shifted. The bravado was gone. The red envelopes were sitting on the coffee table like unexploded bombs. Kyle was on the phone, his voice hushed, likely talking to his bookie, or a loan shark, certainly not an investor. Tasha was staring at the television. And then it happened. It wasn't dramatic like in the movies with sparks flying. It was just a click. The room went black. The TV cut out. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The air conditioning unit outside groaned and fell silent. In the darkness, I heard Tasha scream. Kyle. The lights. I switched the camera view to night vision. I saw them scrambling for their phones, the flashlights cutting through the gloom. It's just a fuse, Kyle said, his voice cracking. It's probably just a blown fuse. But it wasn't a fuse. I watched my father walk to the window and pull back the curtain. The streetlights outside were on. The neighbor's house was blazing with light. It's not a fuse, my father whispered. I sat in my penthouse surrounded by the warm glow of my lamps, the city lights twinkling below me. I took a sip of wine. They wanted to live in the dark. They wanted to ignore the truth. Fine. Now they could sit in it. The financial crash had officially made impact, and they were just beginning to realize that $5 million in imaginary funding couldn't buy a single kilowatt of electricity. The silence that followed the blackout lasted exactly 24 hours. I expected them to endure the darkness a little longer, perhaps out of stubbornness or sheer inability to navigate the logistics of paying a bill. But I underestimated their capacity to pivot. When aggression fails, narcissists do not surrender. They simply change the frequency of their manipulation. They switch from the stick to the carrot, or in my family's case, from the eviction notice to the roast chicken. My phone rang at 6 in the evening. It was my mother again. I stared at the screen, debating whether to let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what desperate sounded like after a night without air conditioning. I answered but said nothing. I just listened to the breathing on the other end. Sophia. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was soft trembling, stripped of all the haughty grandeur from our previous conversation. It was the voice of a fragile old woman, a character she played only when she needed something substantial. Sophia. Please do not hang up, she whispered. We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. The power going out, it made us realize how much we have taken for granted. Sitting in the dark last night, your father and I just held hands and cried. We realized we have lost sight of what matters. It is not the house. It is not the club. It is us. It is you. I sat in my office chair, spinning a pen between my fingers. I did not believe a word of it. People like Beatrice Johnson do not have epiphanies in the dark. They plot revenge. But I needed to know what the endgame was. I needed to know how far they were willing to go. What do you want, Mom? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. I want my daughter back, she said, and I could hear the wet snuffing of fake tears. We want to make it right. Please just come over for dinner tonight. No talk of money, no talk of bills, just a family dinner. Tasha is cooking your favorite roast. Kyle is opening a bottle of the good wine. We just want to apologize to your face. Please, Sophia, for the family. I looked at the calendar on my wall. I had a merger meeting in the morning and a mountain of due diligence files to review. But the strategist in me knew that I could not win a war if I did not inspect the enemy's camp. If they were inviting me back into the lion's den, it meant they had set a trap, and I needed to see the mechanism before I could dismantle it. Fine, I said. 7 o'clock. But if anyone mentions a credit card, I am leaving. I promise, she breathed. Just dinner. See you soon, baby. Baby. She hadn't called me that since I was 6 years old. I drove to the estate in my Porsche, the engine purring beneath me like a panther. As I turned into the driveway, I noticed the lights were blazing. Every chandelier, every porch light, every landscape uplight was on full power. They must have scraped together enough cash from pawned jewelry or a payday loan to get the utility company to flip the switch. It was a show of force, a desperate attempt to prove that they were still standing. I parked the car and took a deep breath. Before I stepped out, I pulled my phone from my purse and opened the voice memo app. I tapped the red record button and slid the phone back into the front pocket of my blazer, the microphone facing out. In the state of Georgia, only one party needs to consent to a recording, and that party was me. I walked up the stone steps, and before I could even ring the bell, the door swung open. It was Tasha. She was wearing an apron over a modest dress, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The Chanel gown was gone. The attitude was gone. She looked like a 1950s housewife who had been lobotomized. Sophia. She squealed, throwing her arms around me. I stiffened. Tasha had not hugged me voluntarily since we were children. She smelled of rosemary and desperation. I am so glad you came. Here, let me take your bag. Can I get you a drink? I walked into the foyer. My parents were standing there smiling like wax figures. My father stepped forward and awkwardly patted my shoulder. Good to see you, kiddo, he mumbled. My mother rushed over and kissed my cheek, her hands lingering on my arms a little too long, as if checking to see if the fabric of my suit was expensive. Come, come, dinner is ready. She ushered us into the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the Wedgwood pattern that was supposed to be my inheritance before I bought the house myself. In the center sat a perfectly roasted chicken surrounded by vegetables. It looked like a Norman Rockwell painting if Norman Rockwell painted scenes of psychological warfare. We sat down. Kyle was at the head of the table naturally. He stood up as I entered, pulling out my chair with a flourish. Sophia, looking sharp as always, he said. That tailored look really works for you. Very executive. Thank you, Kyle, I said, sitting down and checking the angle of my phone in my pocket. Tasha began to serve the food, acting the part of the contrite servant. She poured wine into my crystal goblet. I watched the liquid slosh against the sides. It was a vintage Cabernet from my private cellar, a bottle worth $400. They were drinking my assets to toast my return. So Sophia, my mother, started piling carrots onto her plate. We really want to apologize for the other night. Stress does terrible things to people. We forget that you are working so hard out there. We forget that while we are managing the home front, you are in the trenches. Managing the home front, I took a sip of the wine. It tasted like oak and hypocrisy. You mean living in the home front? I corrected gently. Kyle let out a loud, forced laugh. Sharp! She is sharp! That is what I love about you, Sophia. You have that killer instinct. You see the world in black and white. Numbers and facts. That is a rare gift. I put my fork down. The flattery was so thick I could practically chew it. They were buttering me up, softening the target before the strike. I decided to let them play their hand. So Kyle, I said, how is the startup world treating you? He lit up like a Christmas tree. I am glad you asked. You know, being a visionary is lonely work. But we are on the brink of something massive, truly massive. It is not just an app, Sophia. It is a paradigm shift. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, invading my personal space. We are leveraging blockchain technology to create a neural network for decentralized finance, optimized by machine learning algorithms that predict consumer behavior before the consumer even knows what they want. It is AI meets DeFi. We call it the Nexus. I stared at him. It was word salad, a collection of buzzwords he had likely skimmed from the headlines of TechCrunch without understanding a single syllable. Blockchain, neural networks, machine learning. He was throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sounded expensive. That sounds ambitious, I said. It is revolutionary. He banged his fist on the table lightly for emphasis. And the investors know it. We have Silicon Valley begging to get in. But here's the thing, Sophia. And this is where your expertise comes in. Here it comes, I thought. The trap. These big venture capital firms, they move slow. Bureaucracy, red tape, due diligence. It takes months to clear the funds, but the market moves fast. If I don't launch the beta version next week, I miss the window. I lose the first mover advantage. He took a deep breath, looking at me with wide, pleading eyes. I need a bridge, just a temporary structure to hold the valuation until the Series A funding hits the bank. I have secured a line of credit from a private lender. Very exclusive. But because the IP, the intellectual property, is so valuable, they require a guarantor, someone with a liquid portfolio. He reached under the table and pulled out a leather portfolio. He slid it across the white tablecloth toward me. It moved smoothly, stopping just inches from my wine glass. It is just a formality, really. You would just be vouching for my character. The funds are already approved. We just need a signature to release them, and in return, Sophia, I convince the board to give you 5% equity. 5% of the next unicorn. That could be worth $10 million in a year. I looked at the leather folder. Then I looked at my parents. They had stopped eating. My mother was gripping her napkins so tight her knuckles were white. Tasha was staring at the centerpiece, refusing to blink. They all knew. They were all in on it. This was the dinner. This was the apology. It was all a preamble to this moment. They wanted me to co-sign a loan. But not just any loan. I knew enough about private lenders who moved fast to know this was high-interest predatory debt. If Kyle defaulted, and he would default, I would be on the hook for everything. My assets, my portfolio, my reputation. I reached out and opened the folder. The document was thick. I flipped to the last page. There it was. A line for guarantor. And above it, a frighteningly high principal amount. $500,000. I looked up at Kyle. His smile was frozen, a mask of hopeful greed. So let me get this straight, I said. My voice calm, the recorder in my pocket catching every vibration. You want me to guarantee a $500,000 loan for a company that has no revenue, no product, and a CEO who thinks blockchain is a magic wand? It is not a loan, Kyle insisted, his smile faltering. It is leverage. And Mom? I turned to her. You knew about this. This is why you invited me, Sophia. It is just a signature. She pleaded. You have so much. Why can't you just help your family get a leg up if this works? We never have to ask you for a penny again. If this works? I laughed. A cold, dry sound. This is not a business plan, Mom. This is a suicide note for my credit score. I closed the folder and pushed it back toward Kyle. I am not signing that, Kyle. And I suggest you do not sign it either, unless you want to be explaining to a bankruptcy judge why you borrowed money to build a neural network that doesn't exist. The air in the room changed instantly. The warmth evaporated. The facade cracked. Kyle's face turned a mottled shade of red. Tasha finally looked up, and her eyes were filled with pure venom. You are so selfish! Tasha screamed, slamming her hand on the table. You want us to fail? You want to be the only successful one so you can lord it over us. I stood up, checking to make sure my phone was secure. The recording was going to be perfect. I don't want you to fail, Tasha. I want you to grow up. There is a difference. I walked toward the door, leaving the roast chicken untouched. Enjoy the wine, I called back over my shoulder. It costs more than that entire business plan. I was halfway to the foyer when my father's voice stopped me. It was not the booming command he usually issued when he wanted to assert dominance. It was softer, almost pleading, a tone I had not heard from Marcus Johnson since he asked me to pay off his gambling debts 5 years ago. Sophia, wait. Please, just wait a minute. I stopped. My hand was already on the cold brass handle of the front door. Every instinct in my body told me to run, to get in my car, and drive until the city lights were just a blur in my rearview mirror. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. It is the trait that made me a great wealth manager, and it is the trait that kept me tethered to this sinking ship of a family. I turned around slowly. My father was standing at the entrance to the dining room holding a thick blue folder. He looked old. The recessed lighting of the hallway cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the stress lines around his mouth. For a second, I felt a pang of pity. Just a flicker. But then I remembered the $300 hair appointment Tasha had tried to charge to me while I was working late, and the pity evaporated. "What is it, Dad?" I asked. "I am tired. I have a merger to close in the morning." He walked toward me, his steps heavy. He held the folder out like a peace offering. "I know you are angry with Kyle. I know you think his business is a risk. And maybe you are right. You have always been the smart one, the cautious one." He paused, waiting for the compliment to land. I just stared at him. "But this is not about Kyle. This is about security. For all of us. Look, I know we have had our differences about money, but we are a family, and families protect their assets." He opened the folder. Inside was a stack of legal documents clipped together with a pristine silver binder clip. "Kyle's investors. The ones you are skeptical about. They need collateral. Not cash. Just collateral. To show that the family is serious. We drafted this up. It is just a formality, really. A standard asset verification form. It just lists the house as part of the family trust so the bank sees we have liquidity. It does not transfer anything. It does not put you at risk. It just helps your sister and your brother-in-law get that bridge loan approved tomorrow morning." He pulled a gold Mont Blanc pen from his pocket. My pen. The one I had given him for his 60th birthday. "Just sign here on the last page, as the trustee. It will save us, Sophia. It will fix everything." I looked at the folder. Then I looked at my mother, who was peeking out from the dining room doorway, wringing her hands. Tasha and Kyle were right behind her. The air in the hallway was thick enough to choke on. They were all holding their breath. I took the folder. "Okay, let me just take a look." I walked over to the console table under the hallway mirror and flipped on the lamp. I took my reading glasses out of my purse. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. "Just sign the tabbed page, Sophia," Kyle said, his voice tight. "The legal jargon is standard. It just says you acknowledge the property exists." Standard. In my line of work, the word standard is usually code for buried clauses and hidden liability. I flipped past the first page, which was indeed a generic cover letter about asset verification. I flipped past the second page, which was a non-disclosure agreement. And then I got to page 3. My heart stopped. I had to blink twice to make sure I was reading it correctly. The text was dense, formatted in single-spaced Times New Roman, but the title at the top was bold and unmistakable. Quitclaim deed and irrevocable trust transfer. I scanned the paragraph below it. "I, Sophia Johnson, hereafter referred to as the grantor do, hereby convey, release, and forever quitclaim to the Nexus Holdings, LLC, hereafter referred to as the grantee, all right, title, and interest in the property located at 4500 Tuxedo Road, the Nexus Holdings, LLC, Kyle's fake company." I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. This was not a loan guarantee. This was not an asset verification. This was a robbery. If I signed this document, I would not be co-signing a loan. I would be signing over the ownership of my house, my $2.5 million estate. I would be gifting it to Kyle's shell company for $0. I read further down. Paragraph 4. Grantor acknowledges that this transfer is a gift and receives no monetary compensation. Grantor creates an irrevocable lien against the property in favor of secure capital lending for the amount of $500,000. The room spun. They were not just trying to steal the house. They were stealing the house to immediately mortgage it for cash. They were going to take the title, put it in Kyle's name, borrow $500,000 against it, and then when Kyle inevitably defaulted on the loan, the bank would foreclose. I would lose the house. They would walk away with the cash. And I would be left with nothing but a legal document saying I gave it away voluntarily. I looked up at the mirror. I saw my own reflection. I looked calm. But inside I was screaming. This was not just greed. This was malice. This was a conspiracy. My father, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, was standing 5 feet away, handing me a pen to sign my own execution order. My mother, who claimed to love me, was watching from the doorway, waiting for me to impoverish myself so her golden child could play pretend billionaire. They thought I was stupid. Or they thought I was so desperate for their approval that I would sign anything just to make them smile. My hand was shaking. I forced it to stop. I closed the folder. I turned around. The tension in the room snapped. They all took a step forward. "Did you sign it?" Kyle asked eagerly. I smiled. It was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. I stretched my lips over my teeth and forced the muscles in my face to mimic a pleasant expression. "You know what, Dad?" I said, my voice steady. "This looks pretty standard." I saw the relief wash over them like a physical wave. My mother let out a sob. Kyle pumped his fist. "Great," Dad said, reaching for the folder. "Great. Just sign it and I will run it over to the notary in the morning." I pulled the folder back against my chest, but I said, "You know how my firm is. Compliance is a nightmare. Since the property is technically held in my LLC, I need my compliance officer to just stamp the witness line. It is a work policy. I cannot sign anything regarding assets without a secondary witness from the firm." The smile on Kyle's face vanished. "No, no, no. You do not need that. It is a personal transaction, Sophia. Just sign it. We need to fax it by 9 a.m. I promise, Kyle." I checked my watch. "I will have my lawyer look at it at 7 a.m. He will stamp it, and I will have a courier run it over to you by 8:30. Plenty of time." I took a step toward the door. "Sophia, give me the folder." Kyle's voice was dark now. Threatening. "I cannot, Kyle. Compliance. I would lose my license. You do not want that, do you? Then I really could not help you." I opened the door. The night air rushed in cool and crisp. I walked out. "Sophia!" my father yelled. "Come back here." "Sign the paper." I did not run. I walked to my Porsche. I unlocked the door and threw the folder onto the passenger seat. I got in. I locked the doors. Kyle was running down the steps now. He looked frantic. He knew. He knew that I had the document. He knew that I had the evidence of attempted fraud. I started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating Kyle's terrified face as he reached for my door handle. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway. I drove down the winding road of the estate, the folder sitting next to me like a passenger. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my fingers hurt. They tried to steal my home. My own parents tried to trick me into homelessness. I reached for my phone and dialed a number. It was late, but I knew he would answer. "Hello?" a sleepy voice said. "James," I said. "It is Sophia. I need you to meet me at the office in 20 minutes. And bring a notary. And call the district attorney's office." "Sophia. What is going on?" I looked at the folder one last time. "I have a quitclaim deed here, James. And I have a recording of them coercing me to sign it. We are not just evicting them anymore. We are pressing charges." I turned onto the main highway and floored the accelerator. The tears finally came then, hot and fast, blurring the road ahead, but I let them fall. Because tomorrow I would not be the daughter anymore. Tomorrow, I would be the plaintiff. I did not go home that night. Instead, I drove straight to the glass tower in Midtown where my lawyer James kept his office. The city was asleep, but the war room was wide open. I threw the blue folder onto the mahogany conference table and watched it slide across the polished surface. James picked it up and read it in silence. His face went from tired to terrified in under 60 seconds. He told me that what I held in my hands was not just a bad contract, but a felony in progress. Attempted grand larceny, wire fraud. But I told him to hold off on calling the police. Not yet. I needed to know who I was really dealing with. I sat in that leather chair while the sun came up, and I did what I do best. I followed the money. Or rather, I followed the lack of it. I have access to databases that the general public does not even know exist. LexisNexis, WorldCheck, the kind of tools we use to vet international oligarchs before we take their money. I typed in Kyle's full name. Kyle Jonathan Vance. The screen populated, and then it populated some more, and then it kept scrolling. Kyle was not a tech visionary. He was not a founder. He was not even a coder. Kyle was a ghost. According to the records, the Nexus Holdings LLC had been incorporated exactly 48 hours ago in the state of Delaware using a registered agent service. It had no assets, no board of directors, no patent filings. It was a shell, a hollow vessel designed to swallow my house and disappear, but that was just the appetizer. I started digging into his past addresses. Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia. In every city, the pattern was the same. He would move into an affluent African-American community. He would join the right country clubs. He would date the daughter of a prominent family, and then 6 months later, the family would suffer a catastrophic financial loss, and Kyle would vanish into the wind. I pulled up a news article from the Chicago Tribune dated 4 years ago. The headline read, "Local dentist loses retirement savings in crypto scam." I looked at the photo. The victim was a 60-year-old black man standing next to his weeping daughter. And in the background of a family photo included in the article stood a man who looked younger and thinner but unmistakable. It was Kyle. Back then he was calling himself Tyler. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. He was a predator. A specific kind of parasite who targeted families like mine. Families who had worked twice as hard to build generational wealth only to have it siphoned off by a mediocrity in a tailored suit who knew exactly which buttons to push. He played on our insecurities. He played on our desire for validation from the white establishment. He saw us not as people, but as a retirement plan. I picked up the phone and called a contact of mine at a private investigation firm in New York. I needed the current financials. I needed to know why he was so desperate to get my house tonight. Why the rush? Why the pressure? The report came back within 2 hours. It was ugly. Kyle was not just broke. He was underwater. He owed $200,000 to a hard money lender in New Jersey. The kind of lender who does not report to the credit bureaus but reports to the emergency room. The debt was due on Monday. The pieces fell into place with a sickening click. The bridge loan. The panic at the dinner table. The way he sweated when I hesitated to sign. He did not need capital for an AI revolution. He needed $200,000 to keep his kneecaps intact, and he was willing to sell my house and destroy my family to get it. I looked at the photo of Tasha on my phone screen. She was smiling at her wedding looking at Kyle like he was the sun and stars. She was bratty, she was entitled, she was ungrateful, but she was my sister, and she was sleeping next to a man who would burn her alive to keep himself warm. James asked me what I wanted to do. He said we had enough to arrest. I drove back to the estate at 7 in the morning. The sun was just starting to burn through the Georgia mist, but the house looked ominous looming at the end of the driveway. I had the private investigator's file in my bag. It weighed less than a pound, but it carried enough truth to crush my parents' entire world. I sat in the car for 5 minutes just staring at the front door. This was it. This was the final lifeline. I was about to walk in there and blow up their fantasy, but I was doing it to save them from drowning. I told myself that once they saw the mugshots and the court records, they would wake up. They would apologize. We would circle the wagons and protect the family assets together. I was so naive. I used my key to let myself in. The house was quiet, but the smell of coffee was already drifting from the kitchen. I found them in the sunroom. My mother Beatrice was arranging flowers in a crystal vase, humming to herself. My father Marcus was reading the newspaper, looking relaxed for the first time in days. They looked up when I entered. Their faces went from peaceful to guarded in a split second. "Did you sign it?" my father asked. That was his greeting. Not hello, not how are you, just the transaction. I did not answer. I walked over to the glass table and cleared a space, pushing aside the expensive hydrangeas my mother was fussing over. "We need to talk," I said, "and we need to do it now before Tasha and Kyle wake up." My mother sighed, putting down her shears. "Sophia, if this is another lecture about financial responsibility, I do not have the energy. Today is the launch party. We need positive energy only. It is not a lecture, Mom. It is a warning." I pulled the file out of my bag. I opened it and spread the documents out on the table like a fan of playing cards. The first photo was a mugshot from Chicago. Kyle looking younger but with the same arrogant smirk, holding a placard with a booking number. The second document was a bankruptcy filing from Detroit listing liabilities of over $3 million. The third was a police report regarding the theft of jewelry from a family in Philadelphia. "Look at them," I said, pointing to the mugshot. My father put on his reading glasses. He leaned in. I watched his eyes scan the page. I saw the moment of recognition. His jaw tightened. He blinked rapidly. "Who is Tyler Vance?" my mother asked, peering over his shoulder. "That is Kyle," I said. "Or at least that was Kyle 4 years ago, before he changed his name and moved to Atlanta to find his next victims. He is not a tech CEO, Mom. He is a con artist. He has done this to 3 other families. He targets affluent Black families, gets them to invest in fake companies or sign over assets, and then he disappears." I waited for the explosion. I waited for my father to throw the table over. I waited for my mother to scream. Instead, there was silence. My mother picked up the mugshot. She looked at it for a long time. Then she dropped it back onto the table, as if it were a dirty napkin. "You went to a lot of trouble to Photoshop these, Sophia," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. I stared at her. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. "Photoshopped?" I asked. "Mom, these are court records. Look at the seal. Look at the dates. He is wanted for questioning in 2 states. He owes $200,000 to loan sharks, which is why he needs the house today. If I sign that deed, we lose everything." My father stood up then. He gathered the papers into a pile. His hands were shaking, but not with fear. With rage. "You hired a private investigator to dig dirt on your sister's husband," he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I hired a professional to protect my investment, Dad. To protect you. He is stealing from us. He is trying to build a future," my father shouted, slamming his hand down on the papers. "Everyone has a past, Sophia. Everyone makes mistakes. Maybe he had some trouble in Chicago. Maybe business deals went south. That is what happens to entrepreneurs. But he is here now. He is family. And he is about to close a $5 million deal that will set us up for life." I looked from my father to my mother. They were terrified. I realized then that they believed me. Deep down, they knew. But admitting that Kyle was a fraud meant admitting that they were fools. It meant admitting that Tasha's fairy tale marriage was a lie. It meant that their social status, the envy of the neighborhood, was built on quicksand. They were willing to be robbed rather than be embarrassed. "He is not going to close a deal, Dad," I said, my voice trembling. "He is going to take the mortgage money and run. He does not love Tasha. She is just the mark." "Stop it!" my mother screamed. She rounded the table, her eyes wild. "Stop trying to ruin this for her. You cannot stand it, can you?" You cannot stand that she is happy. You cannot stand that she landed a white man of status while you are alone with your cats and your bank accounts. A white man of status. I laughed a bitter, broken sound. He is a criminal, Mom. He is a businessman, she yelled. And he treats us with respect. He makes us feel important. Unlike you, you dangle your money over our heads like a leash. You make us beg. Kyle dreams with us. He includes us. He is playing you, I shouted back. He is using your insecurity against you. Smack! The sound echoed through the sunroom. My head snapped to the side. My cheek burned. I tasted copper in my mouth. I stood there frozen. My mother had not hit me since I was a child. She was breathing hard, her hand still raised, her chest heaving. You are jealous, she hissed. You are a bitter, jealous little girl. You want to destroy Tasha because she has what you never will. A man who loves her. A family who adores her. Now get out. I slowly turned my head back to look at her. I touched my cheek. It was hot. I looked at my father. He was staring at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. Dad, I whispered. He looked up. His eyes were cold, empty. You heard your mother, he said. Get out. And do not come back until you have that deed signed. I forbid you from saying a word of this to Tasha. Do not touch Kyle. Do not ruin this day. I looked at them, really looked at them. For 32 years, I had chased their approval. I had bought them houses, cars, clothes. I had bailed them out of every mess they made. I had thought that if I just gave enough, if I was just successful enough, they would finally look at me with pride. But looking at my mother's twisted face and my father's cowardice, I realized the truth. They did not love me. They loved what I could provide, and they hated me for being the mirror that showed them their own failures. Something inside me broke, but it was not a breaking that leads to collapse. It was the breaking of chains. I reached out and picked up the mugshot of Kyle. I folded it neatly and put it back in my bag. Okay, I said softly. Okay. My mother asked, looking confused by my sudden calm. Okay, I repeated. You have made your choice. You want to believe the dream. I will not stand in your way anymore. I walked to the door. Sophia, my father called out. The deed, I stopped. I did not turn around. I will handle the paperwork, Dad. Do not worry. Everything will be settled by tonight. I walked out of the house. I got into my car. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My cheek was red and beginning to swell. I did not cover it up with makeup. I wanted to remember it. I picked up my phone and dialed James. Do it, I said. Are you sure? He asked. Once we file this, there is no going back. The sheriff is ready to move, but this will destroy them, Sophia. Publicly. I looked at the house one last time. I saw Tasha walking past the window in her silk robe, oblivious to the fact that her husband was a felon, and her parents were accomplices to their own destruction. They destroyed themselves, James. I am just the demolition crew clearing the rubble. Call the sheriff. Tell him to meet me at the gate at 7 p.m. sharp. And James, make sure the press is there. If they want a show, let's give them a blockbuster. Him now. We could call the police and have them pick him up at the mansion. I shook my head. An arrest was too easy. If the police took him now, my parents would bail him out. They would believe his lies. He would tell them it was a misunderstanding, a clerical error, or that I had framed him. Tasha would stand by her man. They were too deep in the delusion. They needed to see the monster without his mask. I need to kill the dream, James, I said. I need to destroy the fantasy so thoroughly that even my mother cannot deny what she is seeing. I looked at the clock. It was 10 in the morning. The fake launch party was scheduled for tonight. Kyle had invited half of Atlanta to my backyard to show off his success. He was planning to announce the funding that he thought he had secured with my signature. He thought he had won. He probably thought I would forge the witness stamp and send the document over by noon because I always caved. I always fixed it. I picked up the blue folder. James, I need you to draft a new document, a foreclosure notice, and I need you to call the sheriff, not the regular patrol. I want the sheriff, and call the IRS. If he has been running these scams for years, he has definitely missed a few tax returns. I stood up and walked to the window looking out over the city that I had conquered. My family thought I was the villain of this story. They thought I was the barrier to their happiness. Tonight, I was going to show them that I was the only thing standing between them and total annihilation. I am not just going to evict them, James. I said, my voice flat and hard. I am going to save them, and they are going to hate me for it for the rest of their lives. I grabbed my purse. Let's go. We have a party to crash. And I need to make sure I am wearing something spectacular for the mugshot. Not mine, his. I drove away from the estate with the ghost of my mother's handprint still burning on my cheek, but my mind was ice cold. There is a specific kind of clarity that comes when the last bridge is burned. You stop worrying about how to cross back over and you start focusing on how to watch it burn. I went straight to my office downtown, where the air conditioning was set to 65 degrees and the silence was absolute. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I just sat in the glow of my 3 monitors and initiated the final phase of the lockdown. My parents thought they were protecting Kyle. They thought they were shielding a misunderstood entrepreneur. But in reality, they were harboring a fugitive financial parasite. I knew that my father had opened a joint account with Kyle 3 days ago. He had mentioned it in passing, saying it was for operational expenses. It was a lie. It was a laundering channel. Kyle was using my father's clean credit history to move money around, hoping to hide it from his creditors in Chicago and Detroit. I pulled up the banking interface. As a wealth manager with power of attorney over my parents' finances, a document they signed 5 years ago when I saved them from bankruptcy and had conveniently forgotten about, I had full visibility. I saw the balance. $15,000. It was my father's entire savings, the money he had scraped together from his pension checks. I did not hesitate. I typed in the override code. I flagged the account for suspicious activity linked to a known fraud alert. Then I called the fraud department of the bank. I spoke to a vice president I had lunch with once a month. I told him that I suspected elder financial abuse and that the account holder was being coerced. Within 3 minutes, the account was frozen. Not just frozen, but locked down so tight that even a court order would take a week to pry it open. I leaned back in my chair and switched the monitor input to the security feed. The cameras in the house were not the cheap ones you buy at a hardware store. They were enterprise-grade high-definition lenses, concealed in the smoke detectors and the motion sensors. I had installed them years ago, not to spy on my family, but because I had millions of dollars in art and assets in that house. Now, they were the front-row seats to the collapse of an empire. I watched the living room feed. It was 10 in the morning. Kyle was pacing back and forth on the Persian rug. He was holding his phone to his ear and he was sweating. I could see the dark patches on his shirt even through the screen. He was shouting. I turned up the audio. "I told you I would have it by noon," he screamed. "It is a wire transfer. It takes time. Do not threaten me. I know people too." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. His face went pale. The arrogance drained out of him, leaving only the terrified animal beneath. "Please," he whispered. "Please just give me 24 hours. I have the asset. I just need to liquidate." He hung up and threw the phone onto the sofa. He ran his hands through his hair, pulling at the roots. He was cornered. The loan sharks were not waiting for the launch party. They wanted their $200,000, and they wanted it today. Tasha walked into the room. She was holding a dress, looking confused. "Kyle," she asked. "Who was that? Is everything okay for the party?" He spun around and looked at her. It was a look of pure predation. He crossed the room in 2 strides and grabbed her by the shoulders. "We need money, Tasha," he said, his voice shaking. "We need cash. Right now." "What?" She tried to pull away, but the bank accounts are frozen. Sophia locked everything. You said the investors were sending the wire. There are no investors, he screamed right in her face. The silence in the room was deafening. Tasha stood there frozen. The lie she had been living for 2 years had just been shattered by the man she worshipped. What do you mean? She whispered. I mean, I owe people money, Tasha. Bad people. And if I do not pay them by tonight, they are going to come here, and they are going to hurt me. And they might hurt you too. He was manipulating her again, using fear to override her logic. We need to pay them, he said, lowering his voice to a frantic hiss. We need to buy time. Your mother. She has that safe in the master bedroom. The one with the vintage pieces. Tasha's eyes went wide. You want me to steal Mom's jewelry? Kyle? Are you crazy? That necklace was her grandmother's. It is the only thing she has left of value. It is just collateral. He lied. We will buy it back next week when the deal closes, I promise. But right now, Tasha, it is life or death. Do you want me to die? Do you want to be a widow? I watched my sister. I watched the battle playing out on her face. She was spoiled, she was entitled, but she was not a thief. At least she had never been before. But fear is a powerful drug, and Kyle was overdosing her on it. Slowly she nodded. Good girl. He kissed her forehead. And one more thing. Sophia. What about her? Tasha sniffled. She said something about a compliance stamp, a notary seal. She keeps her work bag in the study when she stays over. If we have that seal, Tasha, we do not need her signature. We can stamp the deed ourselves. We can backdate it. We can take the title to the hard money lender and get the cash instantly. My blood ran cold. He was going to forge the deed. He was going to use my professional seal, a felony that would strip me of my license, and send him to federal prison for 20 years to steal my house. I sat there in my office, my finger hovering over the phone. I could call the police right now. I could tell them there was a robbery in progress. They would arrive in 5 minutes. But then I remembered the slap. I remembered my mother calling me jealous. I remembered my father telling me to get out. If I stopped them now, it would just be a domestic dispute. My parents would refuse to press charges. They would say Tasha had permission to borrow the jewelry. They would say Kyle made a mistake. They would sweep it under the rug like they always did. No. I needed more. I needed a crime that could not be forgiven. I needed a crime that was committed against me directly. I took my hand off the phone. I hit the record button on the console. I watched them creep up the stairs. I switched the camera view to the hallway. They looked like cartoon villains tiptoeing past my parents' bedroom door. My parents were downstairs in the kitchen arguing about the catering, unaware that their golden children were upstairs looting the kingdom. Tasha went into the master bedroom. I switched cameras. I saw her kneel before the wall safe. She knew the combination. Of course she did. It was her birthday. She opened it. Her hands were shaking so bad she almost dropped the velvet box. She pulled out the diamond necklace. The one my father had bought my mother 30 years ago before he gambled everything away. It was the only tangible asset they had left. And Tasha stuffed it into her pocket. Then they moved to the study. This was my domain. I watched them break the lock on my desk drawer. Kyle used a letter opener to pry the wood. Splinters flew everywhere. He reached in and grabbed my official notary stamp and my embossing seal. He held it up like a holy grail. We got it, he whispered. We are saved. He grabbed a blank sheet of paper and tested the stamp. The blue ink hit the page. Then he grabbed the quitclaim deed, the one I had left in the car, but he must have printed a new copy from my computer. He stamped it. He signed my name. It was a crude forgery, but with the official seal, it looked legitimate enough for a shady lender. I saved the video file. I backed it up to the cloud. I backed it up to an external drive. They had done it. They had crossed the line from ungrateful family to felons. Burglary, grand larceny, forgery, identity theft, and possession of stolen property. I checked the time. It was noon. The sheriff was scheduled to meet me at 7. 7 hours. 7 hours for them to think they had gotten away with it. 7 hours for Kyle to trade that stolen necklace for cash. 7 hours for them to dig their graves so deep that they would never climb out. I stood up and walked to the window. The city looked beautiful. I felt a strange sense of peace. The burning bridges lit up the way forward perfectly. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the private security detail I had on retainer. "Follow them," I said. "Do not intervene. Just document where they go. I want to know exactly which fence buys the jewelry and which lender takes the forged deed. We are going to take them all down." I hung up and went to the break room to make a cup of tea. It was going to be a long night, and I wanted to be fully awake when the handcuffs clicked. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the Atlanta sky in bruising shades of purple and gold. It was a beautiful evening for a catastrophe. From my vantage point inside the tinted windows of my Porsche, parked a block away, I could see the glow of my estate. It looked like a castle on a hill. The landscape lighting I had installed last summer was highlighting the architectural details of the facade, and the fountain in the circular driveway was dancing in the twilight. To the untrained eye, it was a picture of generational wealth and stability. To me, it looked like a crime scene waiting to be taped off. Kyle had spared no expense. Or rather, he had spared no expense of the money he did not have. There were valet attendants in white jackets rushing back and forth, parking Bentleys and Mercedes. There was a jazz quartet set up on the lawn playing soft, inoffensive standards. Waiters were circulating with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I recognized the catering company. They were the most expensive in the city. I wondered which stolen credit card Kyle had used to pay the deposit, or if he had simply charmed them into billing him later. I watched the guests arrive. It was the who is who of Black Atlanta. There were doctors, lawyers, real estate developers, and even a few local politicians. These were people who had worked hard for their money, people who valued integrity. And they were walking right into a lion's den thinking they were attending a coronation. Kyle had sold them a dream. He had told them he was the next big thing in tech, the savior who would bridge the gap between Silicon Valley and the South. They wanted to believe him. We all want to see our own succeed. That is what made his con so despicable. He was weaponizing community pride. I picked up the binoculars I kept in the glove compartment. I focused the lenses on the front terrace. There was Tasha. She looked breathtaking, I had to admit. She was wearing a floor-length gold gown that shimmered under the porch lights. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon. She was laughing, throwing her head back as she charmed a couple I recognized as the owners of a chain of pharmacies. She played the part of the supportive wife perfectly, the doting partner of the genius inventor. But as I zoomed in closer, I saw it. Resting against her collarbone, glittering with a heavy, undeniable truth, was the diamond necklace. My mother's necklace. The one they had stolen from the safe 7 hours ago. Seeing it made my stomach turn. It was not just jewelry. It was a family heirloom. It was the only thing my father had managed not to lose during his gambling years. And now it was being paraded around the neck of a thief as a prop in a con game. I shifted the view to my parents. Marcus and Beatrice were holding court near the jazz band. My father was smoking a cigar, puffing out smoke with an air of immense satisfaction. He was gesturing grandly, pointing at the house, pointing at the cars, probably telling anyone who would listen that he had mentored Kyle, that he had seen the potential when no one else did. My mother was clutching the arm of the pastor's wife, beaming with pride. She looked vindicated. In her mind, this party proved everything. It proved she was right to bet on Kyle. It proved she was right to slap me. Look at us, she was likely thinking. Look at what we built. And then there was Kyle, the man of the hour. He was standing on a raised platform near the pool holding a microphone. He was vibrating with energy. It was the manic high of a gambler who has pushed all his chips into the center of the table and is waiting for the river card. He was not just lying, he was performing. I lowered the window slightly to hear him. The wind carried his voice. "We are not just building code," he shouted, his voice amplified by the expensive sound system. "We are building a legacy. The Nexus is about freedom, It is about taking control of our financial destiny. And tonight, standing here in my home, I want to thank you all for believing in that vision." My home. The audacity was so thick I could taste it. He was standing on my patio next to my pool, claiming ownership of my hard work, while my forged signature burned a hole in his pocket. He had probably spent the afternoon calling the hard money lenders, sending them scans of the forged deed, promising them that the title was clear and the equity was theirs for the taking. He thought he had pulled it off. He thought the silence from my end meant I was defeated or scared. I put the binoculars down. It was time. I looked into the rearview mirror. A black SUV pulled up behind me. No lights, no sirens, just the heavy, imposing grille of a government vehicle. The door opened and Sheriff Miller stepped out. He was a large man with a face carved from granite. He adjusted his hat and walked toward my car. I stepped out to meet him. I was wearing a white suit, sharp and tailored. "I wanted to look like the angel of death," Ms. Johnson, the sheriff said. His voice was deep and gravelly. "We have reviewed the evidence provided by your attorney. The video footage of the theft is clear, the forgery is clear, and we have confirmation from the bank regarding the wire fraud attempt. We have a warrant for the arrest of Kyle Vance and Tasha Vance." "Thank you, Sheriff," I said. My voice was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. "We also have reason to believe your parents are accessories given their presence and the use of their accounts," he added. "But the district attorney wants to focus on the ringleader first. How do you want to handle this?" "We can go in the back way, quietly." I looked at the house. I looked at the lights and the laughing guests. I looked at the lie they were spinning. If we went in quietly, they would spin that too. They would tell the guests it was a misunderstanding. They would say I was a jealous sister calling the cops for no reason. They would survive the scandal. "No, Sheriff," I said. "We go in the front. But ma'am, there are civilians in there. It could cause a panic." "They are not civilians, Sheriff. They are witnesses, and they are potential victims. If Kyle collects a single check from anyone tonight, that is another crime. We need to stop this now, and we need everyone to see exactly who he is." Sheriff Miller nodded. He signaled to the SUV. 2 deputies stepped out. They checked their holsters. I started walking up the hill. The gravel crunched beneath my heels. The sheriff walked beside me, his presence a heavy shadow. The deputies flanked us. We reached the wrought iron gates. The valet attendants froze. One of them dropped a set of keys. They saw the uniforms, they saw the guns. They stepped aside without a word. We walked up the long driveway. The music grew louder. Kyle was still talking. "And that is why I am opening the floor for the first round of Series A investment right now," he was saying. "The buy-in is high, but the returns—" He stopped mid-sentence. He saw me. I emerged from the shadows into the light of the driveway. I did not stop walking. I walked straight up the center of the path, my eyes locked on his. The jazz band trailed off. The drummer hit a final confused cymbal crash. The guests turned around. A murmur went through the crowd. They saw Sophia, the daughter they all knew, and then they saw the sheriff. The silence that fell over the lawn was absolute. The only sound was the fountain splashing behind me and the click of my heels on the pavement. "Sophia." My mother's voice rang out shrill and terrified. "What are you doing?" I ignored her. I kept walking until I was standing at the foot of the raised platform. I looked up at Kyle. He looked like he had seen a ghost. His face was gray. The microphone slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a deafening screech of feedback that made everyone flinch. I turned to face the crowd. I saw the faces of my neighbors, my colleagues, my community. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice was calm, projecting clearly without a microphone. "I apologize for the interruption, but I am afraid this event has been cancelled. Sophia. My father pushed his way through the crowd. Have you lost your mind? Get these police off my property. I turned to my father. It is not your property, Dad, and it is certainly not his. I pointed at Kyle. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal caught the light of the chandeliers. Kyle Vance, he boomed. You are under arrest for grand larceny, forgery, wire fraud, and identity theft. Put your hands behind your back. The crowd gasped. A woman screamed. Kyle tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. He scrambled backward, tripping over a speaker cable. He nearly fell into the pool. The deputies were on him in seconds. They dragged him down from the platform. Tasha let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. No, leave him alone. He didn't do anything. Sheriff Miller turned to her. Tasha Vance, please turn around. You are also under arrest for burglary and conspiracy to commit fraud. The guests parted like the Red Sea as the deputies marched Tasha and Kyle toward the flashing lights that were now illuminating the driveway. I stood alone in the center of the chaos. My mother collapsed into a chair sobbing. My father stood frozen, staring at me with hatred. But I did not feel their hate. I felt the cool night air on my face. The party was over. The hangover was just beginning. The chaos on the lawn was a swirling vortex of blue lights and shouting, but in the center of it I felt a strange and terrifying calm. Sheriff Miller and his deputies were struggling to subdue Kyle, who was thrashing and screaming about his constitutional rights and his net worth. Tasha was clinging to the railing of the gazebo, her fingernails digging into the wood, wailing like a banshee that her life was over. My parents were paralyzed statues of shock, their faces illuminated by the strobe effect of the police cruisers. But the guests, the 300 pillars of Atlanta society, were simply staring. They were confused. They were frightened. They had come for a coronation and witnessed an execution. I realized in that moment that an arrest was not enough. If I let the police drag them away now, the narrative would still be open to interpretation. People would whisper. They would say I was vindictive. They would say it was a family dispute that got out of hand. They would say Kyle was a martyr. I needed to close the book. I needed to burn the book so thoroughly that no one could ever read the lies again. I stepped up onto this platform. The wood echoed beneath my heels. I walked past the spot where Kyle had been standing just moments ago, preaching his gospel of fraud. I reached down and picked up the microphone. It was heavy in my hand, cold and solid. I tapped it once. The sound boomed through the speakers, causing the crowd to flinch. Please. I said, my voice amplified across the estate, rolling over the manicured lawns and the terrified guests. May I have your attention? The murmuring stopped. Every eye turned to me. I saw judgment in some faces, pity in others. But mostly I saw a desperate hunger for an explanation. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and impending ruin. I am sorry to interrupt your evening. I began my tone conversational as if I were giving a toast at a wedding rather than dismantling a crime syndicate. But I am afraid the party is over. You were invited here tonight under false pretenses. You were told you were guests at the launch of a revolutionary technology company. You were told you were standing on the property of a successful CEO. I paused, letting the words hang in the humid air. The truth is, you are standing on private property. My property. And the people who invited you here, the people who took your coats and poured your champagne and asked for your bank routing numbers, are not hosts. They are trespassers, and as of 10 minutes ago, they are felons. A gasp rippled through the crowd like a wave. I saw a well-known banker clutch his chest. I saw a real estate mogul pull out his phone, probably to cancel a check. Sophia. My mother shrieked from the front row, her voice cracking with hysteria. Stop this. Have you no shame? That is your sister. That is your family. I looked down at her. Beatrice Johnson, the woman who had taught me to curtsy and smile while the world burned. She was shaking, trembling in her designer gown, but her eyes were still filled with that toxic mix of entitlement and denial. She truly believed that if she screamed loud enough, reality would bend to her will. "I am done with shame, Mother," I said into the microphone. "I carried your shame for 5 years. I paid for it. I housed it. I clothed it. But tonight I am returning it to its rightful owners." I turned my back to the crowd and walked toward the large projection screen that Kyle had set up. It was displaying a loop of his logo, a sleek, futuristic N for the Nexus. It was the backdrop for his con. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I located the HDMI cable that was connected to his laptop. I unplugged his machine and plugged in mine. The screen flickered black for a second. The crowd held its breath. Then an image appeared. It was 10 feet tall, crisp, and undeniable. It was not a logo. It was a PDF document. A police report from the Chicago Police Department. I turned back to the crowd. "This is the man you were about to give $5 million to," I said, pointing at the screen. I swiped on my phone. The image changed. It was a mugshot. Kyle, looking younger, looking scared, holding a placard. Kyle Jonathan Vance, also known as Tyler Vance, also known as Marcus Thorne. Wanted in Illinois for Ponzi scheme fraud. Wanted in Michigan for identity theft. I heard the murmurs turning into angry shouts. People were recognizing the face. They were realizing how close they had come to losing their children's college funds, their retirement savings. He came to this city 6 months ago not to build a business, but to find a mark. And he found one. He found a family desperate for status. A family so hungry to be seen as elite that they ignored every red flag, every warning sign, every background check. I looked at Kyle, who was now cuffed and being held against the hood of a police car. He had stopped screaming. He was staring at the screen, his face a mask of defeat. But he didn't work alone. I continued, "A con man needs a willing accomplice. Someone who is willing to trade their integrity for a diamond necklace and a front row seat at the country club." I swiped again. The video file loaded. It was the footage from earlier that day. The timestamp was clearly visible in the corner. 43 p.m. The audio boomed through the speakers. "We need money." Tasha Kyle's voice filled the garden, frantic and cruel. "We need cash right now." The crowd watched in horrified silence as Tasha appeared on the screen. They watched her kneel before the safe. They watched her shaking hands punch in the code. They watched her pull out the velvet box. "No!" Tasha screamed from where the deputies were holding her. "Turn it off. Sophia, please turn it off." I did not turn it off. I let it play. I let them see her open the box. I let them see the glimmer of the diamond necklace. My mother's necklace. And then I let them hear the smoking gun. "What about Sophia?" Tasha's voice on the recording whispered. "We can stamp the deed ourselves." Kyle's voice replied. "We can backdate it. We can take the title to the hard money lender." The gasp from the crowd this time was not just shock. It was revulsion. They were watching a sister steal from a sister. They were watching a daughter rob a mother. It was a violation of the most sacred code of the community. You do not steal from family. I paused the video on a freeze frame of Tasha holding my notary stamp, her face twisted in a mask of greed and fear. "That," I said, pointing at the frozen image of my sister, "is the reality behind the Instagram filters. That is the family values they have been preaching to you all night. They were not planning to invest your money. They were planning to steal my home, use my professional seal to commit mortgage fraud, and then disappear before the first loan payment was due." I looked at my mother. She was staring at the screen, her mouth open. She was looking at the necklace in Tasha's hand. The necklace she thought was safe in her bedroom. The necklace she had accused me of being jealous of. She turned to Tasha, her golden child, her perfect angel. "You took it," my mother whispered. Her voice was faint, but in the silence of the garden it sounded like a gunshot. "You stole Grandma's necklace." Tasha was sobbing now, her head hanging low, her body sagging against the deputy. He made me do it, Mom. He said they would kill him. I took a step forward, to the edge of the stage. I looked out at the sea of faces. I apologize for the drama. I apologize that you had to witness this. But I will not apologize for protecting what is mine. This estate is not the headquarters of the Nexus. It is my home. It is the result of 10 years of 80-hour weeks and honest work, and tonight I am reclaiming it. I signaled to Sheriff Miller. Get them off my property. The deputies began to move. They shoved Kyle into the back of the first cruiser. He tried to lock eyes with me, tried to summon one last look of defiance, but he couldn't. He looked small. He looked cheap. They led Tasha to the second car. She was stumbling, her gold dress dragging in the dirt, the hem tearing on the gravel. She looked back at our parents, screaming for help. Daddy, do something. Don't let them take me. My father, Marcus, turned away. He could not look at her. He could not look at the guests. He could not look at me. He just stared at his shoes, a man whose vanity had cost him his dignity. As the police cars began to pull away, their sirens chirping once to clear the path, the guests began to disperse. They moved quickly, quietly, like water draining from a tub. They avoided eye contact with my parents. They whispered to each other, checking their wallets, checking their phones, thanking God they hadn't signed those checks yet. I stood on the stage alone. The screen behind me went black as I unplugged my phone. The music was gone. The shouting was gone. There was only the sound of crickets and the distant hum of the city. I looked down at my parents. They were the only two people left on the lawn. They looked like refugees in a war zone, standing amidst the abandoned champagne glasses and the scattered hors d'oeuvres. My mother looked up at me. Her face was streaked with mascara. She looked older than I had ever seen her. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to scold me, perhaps to beg, but no sound came out. I lowered the microphone. I did not need it anymore. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, I said. My lawyer will be in touch regarding the restitution for the stolen jewelry and the emotional damages. Sophia. My father croaked. I turned around and walked off the stage. I did not look back. I walked through the empty garden, past the fountain, past the valet stand where the attendants were packing up. I walked into my house and locked the door behind me. I leaned against the heavy wood and closed my eyes. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking, but for the first time in my life I felt light. I felt clean. The tumor had been cut out. The wound would bleed for a while, but it would heal. And it would heal properly this time, without the infection that had been poisoning me for 30 years. I walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and drank it standing up. It was the best water I had ever tasted. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting tight is distinct. It is a sharp, metallic click that signals the end of freedom and the beginning of accountability. I stood on the porch of my estate and listened to that sound repeat itself. Click, click, click. It was the only rhythm left in a night that had started with jazz and ended with justice. Kyle was pressed against the hood of the sheriff's cruiser. The polished metal was probably cold against his cheek, but he was sweating so profusely that steam was practically rising from him. The facade of the confident tech CEO had completely dissolved, leaving behind a terrified grifter who realized he had run out of road. "You cannot do this," Kyle screamed, his voice cracking. "Do you know who I am? I am an innovator. I am closing a Series A round tomorrow. This is a mistake, a huge mistake. I will sue this entire department for false arrest." Sheriff Miller did not even blink. He leaned in close to Kyle's ear and spoke with the calm authority of a man who had seen 1,000 men like Kyle crumble. "You have the right to remain silent, Mr. Vance. I suggest you use it, because every word you say is digging the hole deeper. We have the wire logs. We have the forged deed. We have the video of the burglary. There is no Series A round. There is only a cell in county waiting for you." Kyle stopped thrashing. He went rigid. His eyes darted around the driveway, looking for an escape, looking for a scapegoat. They landed on Tasha. She was standing a few feet away, flanked by a deputy, tears streaming down her face, ruining her professional makeup. She looked lost. She looked like a child waiting for her parents to pick her up from a bad dream. "It was her!" Kyle yelled, twisting his neck to point his chin at his wife. "She did it. She stole the necklace. She forged the stamp. I told her not to. I told her it was wrong. But she said her sister would never press charges. She is the one you want. I am just a victim of a crazy family." The air left the driveway. Even the deputies paused for a second, stunned by the sheer cowardice on display. Tasha looked at her husband, the man she had defended against me, the man she had called a visionary, the man she had stolen from our mother to protect. She looked at him, and for the first time in her life, the fog of delusion lifted. She saw him not as a savior, but as a rat willing to chew through her to save himself. "Kyle," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How can you say that? You said we were partners. You said you loved me." "I love not going to federal prison," Kyle spat back. "You are the one with the notary stamp in your purse." "Tasha, you are the one on the video." Officer, check her purse. "The stamp is right there." The deputy next to Tasha reached for her clutch. Tasha tried to pull away, but he was stronger. He opened the bag. He pulled out my heavy brass notary seal. He held it up under the porch light. It glinted like an accusation. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back," the deputy said. "No," Tasha shrieked, pulling away. "No, please, Daddy, Mom. Help me. He is lying. Kyle made me do it." My parents finally broke out of their paralysis. My father, Marcus, lunged forward, his face purple with rage and confusion. He grabbed the deputy's arm. "Get your hands off my daughter." "Do you know who I am?" "This is a misunderstanding." "Put her down." Sheriff Miller stepped between my father and the deputy. He put a hand on his holster, not drawing his weapon, but making his presence felt. "Mr. Johnson, take a step back. Now. Unless you want to join them for obstruction of justice and harboring a fugitive." "But she is my little girl." My mother wailed, collapsing against my father. "She didn't mean it. She is a good girl. Sophia, tell them. Sophia, tell them to stop." And there it was. The pivot. For 30 years they had ignored me. For 30 years I was the ATM, the fix-it girl, the one they called only when the check cleared. And now, in the wreckage of their own making, they turned to me expecting me to wave a magic wand and make the consequences disappear. Tasha turned to me too. She was handcuffed now, her expensive gold dress twisted around her body, her arms pinned behind her back. She looked small. "Sophia, please," she sobbed. "Please tell them. I am your sister. We are blood. You cannot let them take me to jail. I will lose everything. My reputation, my friends. Please, Sophia, just tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you gave me permission." I looked down at her from the steps. I looked at the sister who had banned me from a party I paid for, the sister who had called me jealous, the sister who had broken into my safe and stolen the tools of my trade to rob me of my home. I walked slowly down the stairs until I was standing right in front of her. The blue lights flashed across her face, painting her in alternating shades of guilt and terror. "I did give you permission, Tasha," I said softly. Hope flared in her eyes. My parents gasped. "Really? You did? I gave you permission to be an adult." I continued, my voice hardening. "I gave you 30 days to figure out your life. I gave you a warning, but you chose to be a thief instead." "But I am your sister," she screamed. "You stopped being my sister the moment you decided to become his accomplice," I said, pointing at Kyle, who was being shoved into the back of the cruiser. "You stole Mom's necklace, Tasha. You stole my professional seal. You tried to steal my house. That is not what sisters do. That is what criminals do." I signaled to the deputy. "Take her away." "No. Sophia. I hate you, I hate you," Tasha screamed as they dragged her toward the second car. She fought them, kicking her heels into the gravel, leaving deep gouges in the driveway. Her screams echoed off the trees long after the car door slammed shut, cutting off her voice. I stood there in the silence that followed. The engines revved. The cars began to roll down the long driveway, the red taillights disappearing into the night. My parents were left standing in the dust. My father looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. His shoulders were slumped, his arrogance evaporated. My mother was sitting on the ground, weeping into her hands. They looked at the empty space where their golden child used to be. They looked at the house they had pretended to own. And then slowly, they looked at me. They realized in that moment that they had bet on the wrong horse. They had poured all their love, all their pride, all their hope into a daughter who was nothing more than a reflection of their own vanity. And they had discarded the daughter who had actually built the foundation they stood on. Sophia, my mother whispered, reaching a hand out toward me. Baby, please. I looked at her hand. It was shaking. It was the same hand that had slapped me this morning. I stepped back out of her reach. The locks will be changed by morning, I said. My assistant will be here at 8 a.m. with boxes. You can take your clothes and your personal items. Anything bought with my credit cards stays. Sophia, you cannot throw us out. My father croaked. We have nowhere to go. You have each other, I said. And you have your pride. Maybe you can deposit that at the bank and see if they give you a mortgage. I turned around and walked back up the stairs. I did not slam the door. I closed it gently but firmly. The click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a chapter ending. It was the sound of a vault locking. It was the sound of me finally choosing myself. I was alone in the big house, but for the first time, it did not feel empty. It felt like mine. The sun rose over Atlanta with a cruel clarity the next morning. It was the kind of bright, exposing light that leaves no corner for secrets to hide in. I had not slept. I had spent the night in my office reviewing the terms of the occupancy agreement my parents had signed 5 years ago, the one they never bothered to read because they assumed my generosity was a renewable resource. Clause 4, Section B stated clearly that any engagement in criminal activity on the premises resulted in an immediate revocation of tenancy rights. Burglary and conspiracy to commit fraud definitely counted as criminal activity. At 7:55 in the morning, a convoy of 3 white trucks pulled up the winding driveway. They were not luxury movers. They were an eviction clearing service, the kind banks use when they foreclose on a property and need it emptied fast. I walked out onto the porch with a mug of black coffee in my hand. I was wearing a silk robe that cost more than my father's car, watching the finale of the tragedy they had written for themselves. My parents were still in the house. I had heard them moving around downstairs since dawn, whispering, arguing, probably trying to figure out which lie would save them this time. When the heavy boots of the removal crew hit the porch steps, the front door flew open. My father, Marcus, stepped out. He was wearing the same tuxedo pants from the night before, his shirt unbuttoned, looking like the hangover of a century. He saw the trucks. He saw the men in gray jumpsuits carrying empty black construction bags. He saw me. "What is this?" he demanded, though his voice lacked its usual thunder. "Sophia, what is going on? We need to go to the police station to bail out your sister. We do not have time for this." I took a sip of coffee and checked my watch. "You do not have a car to get to the police station, Dad, and you do not have a home to come back to." I signaled to the foreman of the crew, a large man named Davis, who I had briefed personally an hour ago. The agreement was 30 days. My father shouted, trying to block the doorway with his body. "You said 30 days last night. You cannot just change the law because you are angry." I walked down the steps slowly until I was standing toe-to-toe with him. "The law changed when your daughter and your son-in-law turned my home into a crime scene, Dad. Emergency eviction protocols apply when the tenants pose a security risk or damage the property. Theft of a diamond necklace and forgery of legal documents constitutes a risk. You have exactly 0 days. You have now. I nodded to Davis. Clear it out. Everything that is not furniture belonging to the estate goes in the bags. Clothes, shoes, toiletries. If it is loose, it goes. The crew surged forward. My father tried to hold his ground, but he was an old man, exhausted by his own ego, and they were professionals paid by the hour. They flowed past him like water around a rock. My mother Beatrice was standing in the foyer. She screamed when the first mover grabbed a stack of fashion magazines from the console table and swept them into a trash bag. Stop! What are you doing? Those are mine. I leaned against the doorframe and watched. It was brutal, I will admit. There is a violence to eviction that feels physical even when no one is being touched. The crew moved upstairs to the master suite and to Tasha's old room, the room she and Kyle had been occupying for months. I followed them up. I wanted to see it. The movers didn't fold the clothes. They didn't wrap the shoes in tissue paper. They opened Tasha's closet, a shrine to consumerism funded by my bank account, and they started grabbing armfuls of silk cashmere and denim. Designer dresses I had bought for her birthdays. Handbags she had guilted me into purchasing. It all went into the black plastic contractor bags. Be careful with that. That is a Birkin, my mother shrieked, following them into the room. It is a replica, Mom, I said from the doorway. Kyle bought it for her on Canal Street. Check the stitching. She turned to look at me, her eyes wide with betrayal. You are enjoying this. You are actually enjoying this. I am not enjoying it, Mom. I am executing a transaction. You occupied a space you could not afford, and now the market is correcting itself. Downstairs, the front door was propped open. The movers formed a line, passing the bulging black bags out to the curb. They didn't put them in the trucks. My instructions were specific. The trucks were only for the large items they wanted to keep and pay to put in storage. The personal effects, the clothes, the trinkets, the debris of their lives were to be placed on the curb. I walked outside. The pile of black bags was growing. It looked like a mountain of garbage, but inside was probably $50,000 worth of merchandise. And then I noticed the audience, the neighbors. In a neighborhood like Buckhead, silence is the ultimate currency, but scandal is the ultimate entertainment. The police cars last night had drawn attention, but the eviction trucks this morning had confirmed the gossip. Mrs. Higgins from next door was standing by her hedges pretending to water hydrangeas that were already dead. The Thompson family across the street was on their balcony, and at the end of the driveway a group of teenagers and a few dog walkers had gathered. Phones were out. I could see the ring lights reflecting in their eyes. They were filming. Look at that, I heard one of them say. Isn't that the influencer Tasha's house, the one who posts about black excellence? Yeah, looks like her excellence just got evicted. Another laughed. I watched my father stumble out of the house carrying a box of his cigars. He saw the phones. He saw the neighbors watching. For a man who lived for appearances, this was a fate worse than death. He tried to shield his face with the box, ducking his head, shrinking into himself. The king of the castle was now just an old man on a sidewalk. My mother came out last. She was clutching her jewelry box, the one Tasha hadn't managed to loot completely. She looked at the pile of trash bags on the curb. She looked at the neighbors pointing and whispering. She looked at the luxury cars in the driveway that she no longer had the keys to. She walked over to me. Her face was gray, stripped of makeup, stripped of pretense. She reached out and touched my arm. Her hand was cold. Sophia, she whispered. Con oi. That was the Vietnamese term for child she hadn't used since I was a baby, a relic from her own mother she usually suppressed to sound more American. Con oi, I was wrong. We were wrong. We got caught up in the excitement. We just wanted to be proud. We wanted to win. Please, don't do this. Don't let them film us like this. Let us back inside. We can fix this. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had slapped me yesterday. I looked at the woman who had watched her husband try to steal my house and said nothing. I gently removed her hand from my arm. It felt like brushing off a dead leaf. You are not sorry that you did it, Mom, I said, my voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. You are sorry that the horse you bet on broke its leg, Sophia. You bet on Kyle because he was a man, you bet on Tasha because she was pretty, and you bet against me because I was just the workhorse. Well, the race is over, and you lost. I pointed to the street past the iron gates, past the manicured lawn I paid thousands to maintain. My father was already walking down the driveway defeated, dragging a suitcase with a broken wheel. Go to the police station, Mom. Maybe Kyle can explain his vision to you through the glass partition. But where will we sleep? She sobbed. I don't know, I said. But I suggest you get moving. It looks like it's going to rain and those trash bags aren't waterproof. Get off my grass, Mother. She stared at me for one last second, searching for a trace of the daughter she could manipulate. She found only a landlord. She turned and began the long walk down the driveway, her heels sinking into the gravel, walking toward the jeering crowd and the flashing cameras. I turned my back on them. I walked inside the house and signaled Davis to close the heavy oak door. The sound of the latch clicking shut echoed through the empty foyer. I walked into the kitchen, picked up my phone, and opened the banking app. I saw the legal fees for the prosecution pending. I clicked approve. Then I called the locksmith. It was time to change the codes. The eviction was complete. The infestation was gone. And for the first time in 30 years, the air in the house smelled clean. The fall of a golden child is not a loud crash. It is a slow, suffocating slide into irrelevance. Tasha made bail 3 days after the arrest. My parents used the last of their hidden cash reserves to pay a bondsman selling my father's gold watch and my mother's remaining designer handbags to secure her release. They probably thought that once she was out, they could spin the narrative. They thought they could go on a press tour, cry on a few talk shows, and blame everything on Kyle. They thought the community would embrace them as victims of a charming predator. But they forgot that I had released the receipts. The video of Tasha stealing the necklace had been viewed 4 million times in 48 hours. The internet does not forgive, and it certainly does not forget. When Tasha walked out of the county detention center, she was not greeted by a sympathetic public. She was greeted by silence. Her phone, which had once been her scepter, was now a device of torture. Her Instagram account had been flooded with snake emojis and comments calling her a thief and a fraud. Brands that had sent her free products were issuing public statements distancing themselves from her. The country club revoked her membership, citing a morals clause in the bylaws. Her friends, the women she brunched with and gossiped with, blocked her number. She was radioactive. The legal reality was even colder. While Kyle was denied bail due to being a flight risk, Tasha was facing felony charges that required a high-priced defense attorney. But the Bank of Sophia was closed. My parents applied for legal aid but were told their previous lifestyle raised questions about their assets. They were stuck in a limbo of their own making. And for the first time in her 29 years, Tasha had to do something she had considered beneath her. She had to get a job. She applied to boutiques in Buckhead, thinking her fashion sense would be an asset. They laughed her out of the store, not wanting a known shoplifter around their inventory. She applied to reception jobs, but a simple Google search of her name brought up the mugshot. Finally, she landed where gravity takes everyone who has no skills and no humility. I saw her a month later. I did not go inside, but I sat in my car in the parking lot of the Walmart Supercenter on the outskirts of the city. I watched through the window. Tasha was standing at register 4. She was wearing the blue vest. It was 2 sizes too big, hanging off her frame like a shroud of defeat. Her hair, which used to be professionally blown out 3 times a week, was pulled back in a messy bun. Her face was bare of makeup, exposing the dark circles under her eyes. I watched her scan items. A gallon of milk, a pack of diapers, a bag of frozen peas. Beep, beep, beep. The rhythm of her new life. A customer, a woman roughly her age, recognized her. I saw the woman lean in and say something. I saw Tasha flinch. She kept her head down, scanning faster, her hands trembling. She was no longer the queen of the social scene. She was just another employee trying to get through a shift, dealing with the very people she used to look down on. The irony was poetic, but it brought me no joy, only a cold sense of balance being restored. She was finally learning the value of $1 by earning it $10 at an hour. My parents' fate was equally grim. With the eviction notice executed and their credit scores decimated by the inquiries and the frozen accounts, they could not rent anywhere decent. No landlord in Atlanta would touch them. They ended up in a government-subsidized housing complex on the south side of the city. It was a one-bedroom apartment in a building where the elevator was permanently broken and the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors argue about money, just like they did. I know this because my father tried to call my office one last time before I blocked the main switchboard from putting him through. He left a voicemail. He sounded small. He complained about the smell of the hallway. He complained that the heating was inconsistent. He complained that he had to sell his Cadillac for scrap because he couldn't afford the insurance. He asked me how I could sleep at night knowing my parents were living in squalor. I listened to the message and then I deleted it. I slept just fine. In fact, I slept better than I had in years because I knew they were finally living within their means. For the first time in decades, Marcus and Beatrice Johnson were paying their own way. They were surviving on meager Social Security checks and food stamps. There were no more steak dinners, no more cigars, no more pretending to be royalty. My mother, Beatrice, had the hardest adjustment. She had built her entire identity around being the matriarch of a wealthy family. Now she was just an old woman in a polyester dress pushing a cart at the dollar store. The neighbors in the complex didn't care about her past glory. They didn't care about her etiquette. They just wanted her to stop complaining about the noise. She had lost her audience, and without an audience she was fading. She spent her days sitting by the window, waiting for a savior who wasn't coming. She waited for Kyle to get out, but he was facing 20 years. She waited for Tasha to marry rich again, but Tasha was scanning barcodes. And she waited for me to break. But I was not broken. I was forged. I had spent my entire adult life being the safety net, and they had used me as a trampoline to jump higher into their delusions. Cutting the net didn't make me the villain. It made me a realist. I had forced them to face the consequences of their actions, and that is the most honest thing anyone had ever done for them. I drove away from the Walmart that day, leaving my sister to her shift. I drove past the exit for the south side, leaving my parents to their small apartment. I drove back toward the city, toward the skyline that I helped shape. I had a meeting with a new client, a young woman who wanted to start an investment fund for minority entrepreneurs. She was smart. She was humble. She reminded me of myself before the weight of my family tried to crush me. The golden child had fallen, and the pedestal was empty. But looking at the empty space, I realized it wasn't a tragedy. It was a renovation. I had cleared the clutter. I had removed the toxic waste. And now finally I had room to build something real. My family was gone, but my future was just arriving, and it looked bright, steady, and entirely mine. 3 weeks after the eviction trucks pulled away, I stood in the center of the empty living room for the last time. The house on Tuxedo Road was sold. It went to a young couple from California who saw the pool and the chandeliers and saw a dream home. They did not know about the screams that had bounced off the walls or the lies that had been told at the dinner table. To them, it was just a beautiful structure. To me, it was a mausoleum of my family's vanity. I signed the closing papers that morning with a pen that did not shake. Selling the estate was not just a financial transaction. It was an exorcism. I was liquidating the ghosts. I was cashing out the trauma. I walked out the front door and locked it, leaving the keys under the mat for the new owners. I did not look back. There is a saying that you should never look back because you are not going that way. I was going up, specifically to the 45th floor of a glass tower in Midtown. My new penthouse was everything the estate was not. The estate was dark wood and heavy drapes and secrets. The penthouse was glass and steel and light. It was open. It was transparent. Standing on my balcony that evening, holding a glass of wine, I looked out over the city of Atlanta. Somewhere down there in the grid of lights, Tasha was finishing her shift at Walmart, wiping down the conveyor belt. Somewhere down there in the shadows, my parents were heating up soup in a microwave in their subsidized apartment. I did not wish them harm. I just did not wish them anything at all. Their frequency no longer reached my antenna. I turned away from the view and walked back inside. The air smelled of jasmine and expensive leather. Tonight I was hosting a dinner party. But this was not a performance. There were no investors to impress. There were no lies to uphold. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find James, my lawyer, standing there, holding a bottle of scotch. Beside him was Elena, the young entrepreneur I had started mentoring. And behind them were two of my closest friends from college, women who had known me when I was eating instant noodles and studying for my finance exams. "Welcome home," James said, giving me a hug. We sat around the kitchen island. There was no formal dining room in this apartment. I didn't want one. We ate tapas and drank wine, and we laughed. We laughed about work. We laughed about politics. We talked about the future. Elena told us about her first funding round, which was actually real and fully vetted. James told a story about a judge who fell asleep in court. I looked around the room at these people. They did not share my DNA. They did not have my eyes or my last name. But they were my family. They were the people who showed up when I was broken. They were the people who celebrated my wins without jealousy. They were the people who told me the truth even when it was hard to hear. This was the family I had chosen. And looking at them, I realized that biology is the least important factor in bonding. Blood is just a biological accident. Loyalty is a deliberate choice. My phone was sitting on the marble counter face up. It buzzed. The vibration made a harsh sound against the stone, cutting through the laughter. I glanced at the screen. The room blurred for a second. Incoming call. Dad. The laughter in the kitchen faded into the background. I stared at the name. Marcus Johnson. The man who had forbidden me from coming to his party. The man who had watched his son-in-law try to rob me. The man who had called me selfish for wanting to protect my own home. For a split second I felt the old tug, the reflex of the dutiful daughter. Maybe he was sick. Maybe something happened to Mom. Maybe they finally wanted to say they were sorry. But then I remembered the look on his face when he told me to get out of the sunroom. I remembered him standing on the driveway protecting the criminal instead of the victim. I realized that picking up that phone would be opening the door to the haunted house again. It would be inviting the chaos back in. Narcissists do not change. They just regroup. If I answered, he would not apologize. He would ask for money. He would tell me how hard their life was. He would try to plant a seed of guilt, hoping it would grow into a new bank transfer. I looked at James. He saw the name on the screen. He stopped smiling. He gave me a small nod. A nod of permission. A nod of strength. I reached out with my manicured finger. I did not slide to answer. I tapped the icon on the side. I selected block caller. The buzzing stopped. The screen went dark. I picked up the phone and navigated to the settings. I blocked my mother's number. I blocked the number of the detention center where Tasha might try to call collect. I put the phone down. "Everything okay?" Elena asked. I smiled, and this time it reached my eyes. "Everything is perfect," I said. "Just a spam call." I picked up my wine glass and raised it. "To new beginnings," I said. "To freedom," James added, clinking his glass against mine. We finished dinner and watched the city lights twinkle below us. I felt a profound sense of lightness. It was the feeling of dropping a heavy backpack after hiking for 30 years. I had carried them for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to just walk on my own. As the night wound down and my friends left, I stood alone in my silent, beautiful home. I walked to the bedroom and lay down on sheets that were paid for with honest money. There were no monsters in the closet. There were no thieves in the safe. I thought about the journey that brought me here. I thought about the pain of the rejection, the humiliation of the anniversary party, the shock of the betrayal. It had been a fire a terrible scorching fire. But fires do not just destroy, they purify. They burn away the dead wood so that new life can grow. If I had not been pushed to the edge, I never would have jumped. And if I hadn't jumped, I never would have learned that I could fly. I turned off the lamp. The room was dark, but it was a peaceful darkness. To anyone watching this who feels trapped by obligation, to anyone who is setting themselves on fire to keep ungrateful people warm, listen to me. Do not let shared DNA become a suicide pact. You do not owe anyone your sanity. You do not owe anyone your financial security. You do not owe anyone your future. Family is a title that is earned. It is earned through respect. It is earned through love. It is earned through reciprocity. If they cannot pay that price, they do not get a seat at your table. The revenge you want is not screaming at them. It is not hurting them back. The greatest revenge is simply removing your access. It is becoming so successful, so happy, and so free that their absence becomes the foundation of your joy. The sweetest revenge is a full bank account, a quiet home, and a sleep that is deep and dreamless. My name is Sophia. I am free. And I am finally wealthy in all the ways that matter. Thank you for watching my story. If you have ever had to cut ties to save yourself, please hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories of truth and triumph. And remember, the only person you have to live with forever is yourself. Make sure you like the company. Good night. This story teaches us a brutal but necessary truth. Shared DNA is not a suicide pact. Sophia's journey proves that financial independence is the ultimate shield against manipulation. We often cling to toxic relationships out of guilt, believing that endurance is a form of love. It is not. Love requires respect, and when that respect is absent, walking away is not an act of cruelty, but an act of self-preservation. You are the architect of your own peace, and sometimes building a stable future means demolishing the shaky foundations of the past. Never apologize for saving yourself. If this story empowered you to set your own boundaries, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of resilience and justice.